in starting at Riverwood, my plan has been to lay a foundation again on what finding freedom is about, since we got a bunch of new people who have started. And it's really based on the research scientifically that is happening around addiction, around a lot of relationship issues, around incarceration, and that 97% of addicts have this underlying thing called complex trauma, which means they lived in an environment growing up where they didn't feel safe. And so they were constantly in fight or flight mode, and if they were too little to do that, they had to freeze and shut everything down. And what came out of that was 50 different ways of coping, or 50 ramifications or consequences of the complex trauma in their life. And we have been working our way gradually through that. And last week we focused on the fact that a child that grows up in complex trauma has one emotion that overpowers all the others, and that is the emotion of fear. And we looked at that, and we looked at about 6 or 7 different types of fear that a child has who grows up in trauma. And a lot of people who were here who didn't think they had any fear issues came to me afterwards and said they realized they have a lot of fear. And when I smile at you after you tell me that, it's not to make fun of you, it's just I'm glad you're getting it. So I want to talk about more of it because it's such a big part of complex trauma. But I want to start by saying this. What we focused on last week was that a child growing up in complex trauma, the overriding fear is of getting hurt. But what is important to understand is the parents within that family system who are creating an unsafe environment, they also realize that fear has other benefits. And so they use fear as a tool or as a weapon to control the children or get them to obey them. So in a healthy home, where a child is loved unconditionally and accepted, they feel respect for their parents. That is a healthy respect. And they want to please their parents and they want to obey them. And so all of that happens. But in complex trauma, you don't have a natural respect because the parents aren't creating a safe environment. And so parents create respect through fear. You will respect me because you fear me. But then they take it further. They aren't going to be able to get their children to obey them because they respect them and love them. So they have to scare them straight. And what they realize is the best way to get a child to obey in the short run is to make them afraid of very painful consequences. And so they use fear to intimidate the child, to control the child, and then some of them are controlled by fear themselves as parents. And so they're just passing this on. But one of the fears they have as parents is, I'm afraid my child is going to turn out like me. And so as soon as they see their child make one bad decision, so let's say they find that their child is experimenting with pot or got drunk at a party, it triggers their fear as a parent. And so they go and they just go crazy with fear and they try to instill fear in the child. And they say, I'm going to take you down to Maine and Higgins and you're going to see what's going to happen to you if you keep drinking because you're going to end up there. Total overreaction, but that's their fear. But that then creates fear in the child, and eventually the child just rebels against it all. And they make the bad decisions and end up in not so good places. So fear is a big thing. And then another thing that parents will do to motivate their children through fear is they use God as a big club. And they say, if you don't do what I tell you, God will punish you. So now you got what we refer to as spiritual abuse happening. So I will scare you by intimidating you myself, but just to add extra weight to the fear, I will make you afraid of God and that He will punish you. And some of you grew up in that, and that is all a form of abuse. It is using fear to control a child, and that is a terrible thing. So last week we looked at a bunch of those fears, and they're listed there. Tonight I want to give you just 4 more. So number 1, and I'm going to go through the first 2 quickly. A child that grows up in complex trauma, they have trouble saying no. And part of the fear is, if I say no to you, you might not like me. If I say no to you, you might even get mad at me, and I'm afraid of angry people. So I will not say no. And then what happens from that is you basically let people use you and walk all over you, and then you get a resentment, and then you get angry and blow up, and you drive everybody away. Then you feel guilty for driving everybody away because you think I'm a terrible person, and then you let everybody walk all over you again and use you. And so we're going to talk in more detail later of the importance of learning healthy boundaries. And that's what this is about, is people from complex trauma don't set good boundaries, and one of the main areas, they're afraid to say no. Next one, they're afraid of losing what gave them value. And I'll explain this this way, and then I'm going to add more throughout the night. A child from complex trauma doesn't feel they have any value. They feel unlovable, not good enough, with 0 value. But we're created to need to feel that we have value. And then in a complex trauma home, you don't get validated very well for good things. And so you need validation, you need value. And so every person tries to find what gives me value. So for example, a girl may find that she is very pretty and everybody is paying more attention to her than everybody else. And then she concludes, my body is what gives me my value. And then they find out about sex, and they go, my body and my performance in bed is what gives me my value. And they go through life like that, and it seems to work. Then they hit this funny age called between 40 and 50. And their body isn't quite what it used to be. And now the thing that gave them value is diminishing in value. And they are full of fear. Because now, will anybody want me? Will anybody respect me? Because I am losing the thing that gave me value. And so that's where you get a cougar and a puma and all that stuff, because you go and get the facelift and the boob job, and you go, I still got it. But then you hit 60, and it all happens again. So that's a girl thing. Guys do it when it comes to being kind of muscle man, and then they start losing that, and they have a midlife crisis, and they go down that road. Then there's some that they have got their sense of value from being needed. And so they are afraid of not being needed. And so they will chase people around with problems saying, can I help you? Can I help you? Because I need you to need me in order for me to feel value. And then some got all of their value from being a parent. They were raising young children. That made them feel important. That made them see their value. And then the children move out of the house. And they go, now who am I? Now what gives me value? And then many people got their sense of value from their job. That's what gave them prestige. That gave them power. That gave them money, respect. And then they retire and they go, now who am I? I don't feel like I'm worth anything. And so complex trauma, people put their sense of what gives them value in the wrong thing. And then they get afraid of losing that. So let me take that further to the next characteristic. Shame. Now, what you have to understand is this. When a child doesn't feel safe, they feel fear. That's an emotional thing. But right alongside of that, there's another thing happening. And we call that shame. And it's an emotion and a belief, an intellectual piece. And what it simply means is a child develops a core belief that they're not good enough, that they're less than, that they're not lovable, that they don't have any value or very little value. And deep down inside of them, they have this low self-esteem that is being formed. Now you may say, oh, I don't have any shame. So I always use this test with clients. If somebody came up to you and says, you know what, I've been watching you and I'm really impressed with you. I think you're a great person. What would go on in your head? You would go, well, they're saying that to be nice. They don't mean it. Or option two, they don't know me, because if they knew me, they would never say that. Or option three, I wonder what they want. So what you have just done is proven to me that you have shame. Because when somebody gives you a message different than the shame message, that I'm not that great, then you have a system that protects you from believing those other messages. So how does shame develop? You can relate in your own heart, but every child comes into the world at a subconscious level asking these questions. Do I have any value? Do I matter to anybody? Am I lovable? Do I have anybody that is really passionate about me? Do I have anything to offer in my own person, my abilities? Every child asks that. So how do they get those questions answered? Well, you look at the two people in your life that are the closest to you and have the greatest influence in your life, mom and dad. And you watch what they say to you and how they treat you. And that is how you get those questions answered. So if dad is always busy with work or watching sports on TV and he's never emotionally available to you, what do you conclude? I'm not as important as my dad's work. I'm not as important as sports. If mom is always angry at you, and if your parents make fun of you and laugh at you, or abandon you, or abuse you, you go, that tells me who I am. So the child's brain says, the reason I am being abused, it's my fault. I must be really bad. Because to the child at that age, whatever the parents say and do is right. And they will internalize that. So what will happen with dad is he'll love having children until children start to be a bit of an inconvenience. They kind of mess up his selfish plans or mom's selfish plans. And so what they will do is, instead of saying, I'm a selfish parent, they'll say to the kid, quit being so selfish. And the child believes it. And so they begin to go, the reason I am neglected is I guess I'm just not very important. I am not lovable. I don't have much value. I am not good enough. And a child begins to create that belief system. And if they get that kind of sent to them every day through 100 different ways, it gets cemented deep, deep inside of them as this is who you are. And that is why we call it a core belief. And so what then the child does is this. Anybody who gets to know me will draw the same conclusions as mom and dad, that I am no good, that I am not lovable. So I have to hide who I really am. I can't let that get out, because if people see it, they'll reject me or abandon me, just like mom and dad. And that leads us to the next characteristic that we're going to spend the rest of the talk on. So what happens in a child then is this. I so badly want to be known and loved, but the people in my life so far that have got to know me have not loved me. They have neglected me and abandoned me. So I long to be known intimately, but I'm afraid to be known intimately. It scares me to death. What we are finding out, and it's a huge area of psychology today as far as research, is what is known as attachment theory. And what it means is this, that inside of every baby born is a huge need to connect emotionally with their parents. And what that means is that at the very deepest level, they feel unconditionally loved, unconditionally accepted. They feel safe. They feel nurtured. They don't feel the need to wear any masks. They don't feel the need to have up any walls to protect themselves. They can be totally themselves. And they will be accepted and delighted in. I was just reading this week. A baby is born with a brain that develops normally only if somebody delights in them and somebody connects to them. And they feel that emotional warmth, love, safety, security. That's how we are born. We are driven to connect. Now let me just add this. If you think of a child's development, there's the infant, then there's the toddler, the preschooler, then elementary school, middle school, high school, teenage years. A child needs to connect in every one of those stages. And what can happen with a lot of people out of complex trauma is they connect with their kid when they're an infant or a toddler. But then after that, it gets a little bit inconsistent. And that begins to have consequences. So here's one way to look at complex trauma. Complex trauma takes place when a child doesn't connect securely with his parents. Because now, when you don't connect, a couple of things happen. You feel alone. You don't feel like you belong. You feel abandoned. So that's complex trauma. So what the research is showing is that we all are driven to connect. If we don't, then we feel abandoned and we are traumatized. So when I look and deal with clients that I know of complex trauma, I usually can be pretty certain that they never consistently attached in a secure way growing up. Now here is the dilemma. You come into your teen years, you feel somebody showing love to you, you like the feeling, and they want to develop a relationship. And you get in the relationship, and all of a sudden they want to know about you. And fear kicks in. Uh-oh. If I start opening up about the deepest part of me that I've hidden away, they will reject me. So I want intimacy now, but I am afraid of intimacy. So we have a solution. I will develop fake intimacy. I will develop pseudo-intimacy. I will develop things that feel like intimacy, but aren't really. So let me give you some examples. Number one, and this is so important to understand if you're an addict. Do you realize that addiction is a form of bonding or attachment? Think of it this way. We are driven to connect with people, and when we connect with people, it releases a brain chemical called oxytocin, serotonin, and dopamine. If we can't connect with people, we will connect with something, even if it's a synthetic chemical. And I've had many addicts tell me that when they first found drugs and alcohol, they felt this warm, safe, secure feeling. They felt the feelings of connection. They felt the feelings of intimacy. And so, if a person is really going to deal with their addiction, they have to start to learn how to connect in healthy ways. They have to start to learn how to have healthy intimacy. Let me add one piece to that. I find it fascinating to understand porn addiction and sex addiction is all about pseudo-intimacy. So people with porn addiction are usually people who never connected as a child. And they are chasing something that feels like a love connection. Promiscuity, one-night stands, all of those are designed to have the feelings of intimacy without the mess of a relationship. And so that is all part of that. So when people are trying to deal with a porn addiction, I say you need boundaries, you need to have accountability, you need to have certain things that are off limits, yes. But if that's all you'll do, you won't ever beat the porn addiction. You have to learn to connect in a healthy way with some safe people. And that is the challenge. Now, if you're a guy, you go, okay, I'll go just find a nice, pretty young girl and I'll connect with her. No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about non-romantic, safe connection to begin with, so that you begin to learn how to meet that deep, deep need in a healthy way. Okay, other forms of fake intimacy or pseudo-intimacy. Most of you will relate to barroom intimacy, sports, camaraderie. I always tell clients the only time guys pat each other on the butt is when they score a goal or get a touchdown. We get all huggy, and that's that intimate feeling of being on the same team. Laughter creates feelings of closeness, warm emotions. If you get an environment where everybody is touched emotionally and people are just really warm, all of a sudden they feel connected to people. And then one of the dangers that many of people in recovery experience is finding intimacy in one area of life. So take, for example, addiction. You can talk at depth with another addict about your addiction and what your bottom was like, and you will feel a closeness. You realize they have now given the term that you can have trauma intimacy. When you have two guys in war in a foxhole that are fighting to protect each other, they're going through a lot of trauma, and they develop an intimacy only around that one thing. But it's a feeling that's deceptive because it's not all of life. It's one topic, one thing. I think in our culture today with social media, people are feeling false intimacy all the time. You get people that text each other hundreds of times a day, and they say, "We're so close." Do you realize that their conversation went 1 millimeter deep? That's how superficial it was. But it feels close because you talk to each other. There's a study that came out just in the last year on the effects of social media on our children. And you want to know what they're starting to find out? The children of social media are the loneliest generation that's ever lived. Why? They've only got fake intimacy. They don't have true intimacy. It's a sad thing. My wife grew up in a family where they did everything together. And they felt close, but everybody's afraid to talk about their real, true self. And so that was a false form. Gossip is another one. Emotional incest always freaks people out. And it goes like this. If you're a single parent, or maybe your mom had an abusive husband, your dad, and she used to take you aside and pour out her heart and her pain to you, and you became her confidant. That's emotional incest. That is connecting in an unhealthy way that is not age appropriate with a child. And then sometimes in recovery, you will discover what we call intimacy addicts. And they're the person that you meet and you say, "Hi, how are you?" And they go from here to this deep in 5 seconds. And they start pouring out their heart. And you're trying to find a way to escape. But they do that. And they are always looking for people to share their heart. Problem is, it's usually one-sided. But that's a fake type of addiction. So people who've never connected in a secure, healthy way, they will find ways to feel close, but not really connect. Now, let me give you an illustration. Some parents might not let your kids hear what I'm going to say, and you'll hate me for it. But let's say you were made with a need for Pepsi Cola. Okay? So you're made with this need for junk drink. Okay? And let's say you didn't know you had that need, and you grew up in a family where they never drank Pepsi Cola. And so that need was never met. But as you came into your teens, you felt this emptiness. You felt a bit of a thirst in your soul, an ache in your heart. And one day you're over at a friend's, and they give you some Coca-Cola. Now, it's not Pepsi, but it's close enough that it kind of has a similar effect. And so the first time you have Coca-Cola, you have this warm feeling, and you feel so full, and you feel so wonderful. You go, "I have just figured out what I need. Coca-Cola is what I've been thirsting for all my life." Now, there's a problem. It's not truly Pepsi Cola. So after a while, you get the same thirst back. You find that Coke didn't satisfy. It just gave you a little temporary fix. So let's say I came to you one day, and I said to you, "Coke isn't what you need." You're going to go, "What? Coke has satisfied me. Coke has made me feel all these warm feelings. I need Coke." And without realizing it, the wires of your brain got crossed, and you thought Coke was the solution, but you still hadn't tried Pepsi. So if I was able to talk you into trying Pepsi, all of a sudden you would realize Coke was a fake, what I needed. It wasn't the real thing. Pepsi was. Now, let me apply that. All of us are made for true intimacy. That's the Pepsi Cola. But we find this thing growing up called Coca-Cola, which is fake intimacy. And it seems to satisfy. And it seems like we finally got the solution to this desire to connect, this desire for intimacy. And then I come along and I say, you know what? All of that barroom industry, all your Facebook time, all your porn time, all your one-night stands, that's crazy. That's not going to really satisfy. That's not going to meet your deepest need. There's an emptiness that you're always going to have there because that's not the real thing. You're going to go, okay, I partly believe you, but I'm not sure. And so if I was to say, try the real thing, develop a healthy, intimate relationship, you go, thank you, but no thank you. Because that's too scary. I will stay with Coca-Cola because I'm afraid to try Pepsi Cola. And I think what I've seen over the years, in recovery, most people struggle when it comes to this very root issue. I got tons of shame, which have made me afraid to let anybody know me, to have any true connection. So I've developed great ways of false connections. Now I have to give that up and take the risk of trying to find a safe person and gradually building a relationship that will have healthy intimacy. Scares people to death. But if you don't, you will remain feeling all alone, even amongst a crowd of people. You will remain doing all the fake intimacy and feeling empty afterwards and guilty afterwards. At some point, hopefully, you'll say, okay, I'm ready to take this risk with some guidance and some help. I have to start finding true connection. And this is where some people start with a spiritual connection as the safest place for them to begin to connect. They connect with God. Others find somebody a bit older than them that they feel they can trust, and they start to form a relationship, and it gradually spreads into the rest of your life. So those are the 4 fears of tonight. Next